Hello, friends. I recorded this interview a few weeks ago and I was going to include it in one of our episodes, but it came out kind of long and I didn't want to cut it up, so I'm just going to release it as a special bonus episode. It's one of our kaiju related role playing game interviews with Johnathan Wright, who made a game called Mecha versus Kaiju. So we'll play the theme song and maybe do a little ad, and then we'll get into that interview.
1,
2,
3,
4.
Monster movie.
Fun time, go! Monster movie.
Fun time, go. Monster.
Movie.
Fun time.
Go!
Monster movie. Fun time, go.
With Precious D and Honeybee.
Fun time, go!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another of our special role-playing game episodes. Today, I have with me Johnathan Wright, who has written a game called Mecha vs. Kaiju, and there's a couple of different versions of it, so we will get into that. Welcome to the show, Johnathan.
Thanks for having me, Dom.
So, as I mentioned just now, there are a few different versions of this game, and you're working on a new one.
There are, yeah. The MVK story kind of starts several years ago. They had one of the first D20 variant systems was called True 20, and it came out with from Green Ronin, and they had a contest about. They wanted to show how open world their system was, how many different variants you could do, you could create, and so Steve Kenson, who was the man behind Green Ronin at the time, had a contest, create a setting for our game, and so I sent them a little blurb about this idea I had for Mecha versus Kaiju, and I'd recently had this game idea, and then this contest came about, and they wrote back and they said, basically, we read the title and we were sold. And there was, so they gave me a license. This is way back in like 2005. And they gave me a license to use True 20 and to brand it that way. And so yeah, that was the first version of MVK. It came out in 2008 and sold maybe like 100 copies. It was not, I didn't know anything about marketing, and it was just sort of like, like out and gone, and that was pretty much that. Until the kind of like the new era of giant monsters and robots started, like, in the mid-teens, and that was when my friends, started going, hey, I think it's about time you want to go back to MVK. And like I was working and teaching and like kind of living my life and playing games a lot. And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, yeah, that could be something. And that was kind of the germ for the second edition of Mecha vs. Kaiju, which was released with the Fate core engine, which had just recently at that point had this monstrous Kickstarter. I mean, it was just literally like hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think they ran on that money for like 6 or 7 years. I mean, if coming out with source books that they had talked about in that Kickstarter, like for years afterwards. So so that system was like strictly a storytelling system. Like the dice mechanics were minimal. But what it meant was the system was completely hackable. Like you could do so much with it because there was so little there. So I ended up adding a lot to it, and plus it was released through Creative Commons, which meant that you could freely use the rule set, and other people could use the stuff that you created. So I'm a little disappointed. I've never seen anybody use the MBK rules except me, but like I said, you can create so much stuff with that. So they were just building their own stuff. Yeah, I've been releasing Fate source books ever since then. I had a successful Kickstarter. in 2013. This book was released in 2014. I've been putting out supplements ever since.
I noticed there's also a cipher system version of it.
There is, yeah. Last year I put out my last Fate source book, which was a fantasy setting, inspired by an anime that, like, not a whole lot of people know, called Aura Battler Dumbine, and it didn't sell like gangbusters. And I kind of felt like I had done as much with Fate as I could, and so I really started looking for a new edition. I thought it was time. Fate's great, but it seemed to be kind of showing its age a bit, and I was really looking for something that was a little more crunchy. I was always adding sort of mechanics to the game, to make it a little more crunchy. I grew up. I'm a grognard. I'm 53. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons. I played First Edition and Red Box back in the 80s, and I've played
Same.
every. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, I played every system, and so I do like crunch. It's fun to play around with the fiddly bits and build different things. And so I was looking for something that had kind of like storyteller elements and crunch. Cypher System does that pretty well. It is a class-based system. It's very open class-based. But I think I wanted something that was a little more freeform than that. I tried Cortex, and Cortex, again, is a great system. Their licensing agreement wouldn't allow me to sell on Drive-Thru RPG, and it's a limitation of the way that their licensing works. And
Yeah.
so that, as good as Cortex is as a system, for something that I'm going to be marketing, I just couldn't limit what I was selling. Which is why I'm working together with a good friend of mine named Jeremy Forbing, and we are creating a variant of 5th edition D&D called 5 Evolved. And that's going to be the engine for the new Mecha versus Kaiju game.
Yeah, I looked at that a little bit, and I was confused for a moment because I had seen that you were working on a Cortex version, and then I was like, wait, what is this? But then I found your post where you explained why you weren't doing Cortex anymore, and I do think that's a little weird that they don't let you sell it on Drive-Thru. It's very bizarre.
It's a licensing thing. And they have reasons, and they're good reasons from like their business point of view, and it works for them as a company. It just doesn't work for like the small creator. And so, yeah, I just had to find something different. What's interesting is we kind of went back. And by the way, Jeremy Forbing, who is like my rules czar, he has been writing D20 products for like over a decade. He has literally dozens of products on the Dungeon Masters Guild website through Drive-Thru RPG, and if we can put that as a link as well, that would be great, because his stuff is amazing, and he brings just a wealth of not just rules knowledge, but like historical knowledge. And he was the one that noted that the origins, one of the first versions of 5e tried to do kind of a dice pool mechanic. It was rather than using static bonuses for like strength, agility, or skills and things like that, they used die codes. So like if your strength was really low, you might have a D4 for your strength, and if you were like a barbarian, you might have like a D8 or a D10 for your strength. And so you would roll that plus a D20 whenever you were doing anything strength related. And that mechanic really, it really resonates with what I was trying to do with Cortex. So we've gone back to that old build of 5th edition, and we've incorporated that, and we're using that as the core mechanic for 5 Evolved.
I participated in that playtest. I don't remember that. I do remember like superiority die and stuff like that got thrown out that certain classes had, but I did not recall that.
It was an early build, and like you say, it didn't last. It was a little more different than like the previous editions. I think it's like a step too far for them. For us, we're just right in line with the play style we like. Um, you like if you want to take an action, you call out your traits. You've got in Mecha versus Kaiju, we spent a long, long time building the trait sets. Our goal was my goal was to create a system that would allow you to basically do the kind of action and drama from anime and manga. So that was the core that we started. That's the core idea we started with, and all of the mechanics flow from that. So that's why you don't have physical or mental attributes. You don't have skills. What you have are we start with aspects from Fate. That was like one. That's kind of the core storytelling mechanic. So we kept that. So you have a series of aspects that describe your personality, your kind of like current goals, your identity, as we call it, and then there are two aspects that are called drama, and those two aspects are basically two dramatic parts of your life that are in conflict with one another. And so sometimes you'll be performing an action that's like related to sometimes you'll be performing an action that's related to one part of your traumatic life versus another, and those two are always in conflict. So you pick one of those, and those all have a die code. All those are a D6. Then you have your style, how you perform things, and that can be anything between a D4 and a D8. And it's like, are you going to do this in are you going to do this like hard or soft, quiet or loud? The styles are bold, creative, steady, subtle, and swift. And so you decide, and you have varying die codes based on what kind of character you build. And then the third thing you have is values. So your values are basically what's important to you with this action that you're taking. And those are this was an interesting mechanic. Again, coming from from Jeremy's a fevered game design brain. These come in pairs that are sort of opposing. Like there's composure, passion. There's kinship and self-reliance. There's ferocity and spirituality. And each one of those represents a particular thing that is important to you. You build your character, and you can have those two as being equal, or you can boost one of those into a higher type of die, and you can reduce the other one. So they're always sort of in balance, like sort of point-wise. But sometimes you have a character that is like, they're all, they're very headstrong. They don't really keep their cool very strong. So maybe they have like a D8 passion and a D4 composure. And then depending on what the situation is, they might have to roll composure. There are sort of long-term in-game benefits to rolling a D4. Like you get more XP in that scene because you are challenging yourself as part of the story. And that's really, that's really kind of the way I like to play. I like to give players, if you want to be like a power gamer and you want to get roll all D8s in your dice pool, go for it. If that's the way you like playing the game, absolutely do it. If you want to do things that are like a role-playing challenge that might actually not be optimal, you can also do that, and you'll be rewarded from like a role-playing point of view. And those are your three main trait sets, your aspects, styles, and values. And those three, you will always roll those along with your fortune die. That is the D20. Your traits are basically sort of weighing fortune one way or the other, and that's kind of the fun of the game. It's that that's where the chance comes in.
I want to step back for just a moment for any of the less geeky listeners in the audience. I want to mention drivethrurpg.com that we were talking about earlier. Is a website that you can sell PDF. They sell PDFs of role-playing games and some print on demand. Not everything on there is print on demand, but a lot of stuff is. A lot of big companies are on there, but also individual indie creators are on there. And it's kind of the place online to find PDFs of role playing games.
It really is.
I found something the other day that was not on there. It was on the Paizo website and nowhere else on the internet. I was surprised they were not selling it on drive-thru. So
That
it
does sound strange.
It was a kaiju game that is no longer in print, but somehow Paizo has the rights to it and nobody else. It's not originally their game, but I won't go into that. But we will put a link in the show notes to Jonathan's work and his co-creator's work on drive-thru. All the Fate stuff is there that we've been talking about, and the if you like True 20, it's not really an active system anymore, but that is all still on drive-thru. That's a great thing about drive-thru, is that they have a lot of stuff that is not in print and has been out of print for a long time, but it doesn't really cost anything to just put a PDF version of it online and let people find it if they still want it. So
Absolutely. And the great thing about drive-thru is that it is like it's like a store. They have a storefront. So when you go to the webpage, you got all of these like covers with the titles, and you're like, "Ooh, that looks interesting." You click around. It's just like a bookstore. Which is why selling there is so important to small press creators. And I would say, regardless of what system you like, check it out and poke around for that particular system. Like if you like, if you like D20, there is just like mountains of stuff there. And that was also kind of our inspiration for switching over to D20, was just because there's over a decade's worth of source material, and everything that is released through the open gaming license is usable. You can use it in your personal game, but also all those game mechanics can be incorporated into our game. And that's actually what Jeremy has been doing is kind of like taking ideas from all of these different OGL sources, both his own as well as others, and blending them together into this one system. So yeah, it really has the benefit of a decade's worth of game design that we're putting into it.
Right. So this new version we've been talking about, it's not on drive-thru yet. I assume it will be when it's finished. You're developing it through a Patreon right now, correct?
Right. Yeah, we've got the Patreon has it launched last summer, and I've been working with all my patrons, and the tiers that for the Patreon are set up for basically kind of 3 levels of interest in the game. Recruits, which is the $3 level, you get a monthly update on the rules, all the changes, all the the play testing and all of that stuff that's happened. You just get every month. You get a new version of the rules with updates. The pilots at the $5 level can participate in online play testing, scrimmages. I have regular Tuesday night and Saturday morning play tests where people can just like drop in and talk about the game, try out new ideas. And then the Ace level, which is $10, is an actual online campaign I'm running with a great group of people who are all not only really into the genre, but also many of them are into game design. So, we'll run like a 2 or 3 hour session, then maybe take like 20 minutes afterwards and talk about sort of what worked, what didn't. I take a ton of notes from all of these sessions, what the players are feeling about things. And then we spend a couple of weeks going back into the rules, reworking things, tweaking things, sometimes ripping out whole mechanics and rewriting them because that's what you got to do. And then like a couple of weeks later, we come back together and run another session and do it again. It is an actual campaign, so they and we're at risk of getting into lore. And I would warn you that I can talk about lore a lot. I don't know. I do get into that, but
I do want to talk about the lore a little bit because, or maybe a lot, Because, as we say, this version's not out yet, but there are 3 other versions out, and if you already play or want to play in any of those, it's the lore that connects all those different versions. And of course, you could just
Exactly.
take that lore and use it with any system that you're already using, and any of these versions would be good just for getting that part of the game. And that appears, I've got PDFs now of every version, and that seems pretty consistent over the different iterations.
It is, yeah.
Before we get right into that, though, I was curious. You kind of already answered part of this of why it seems like you keep switching systems, and I was curious if you were just trying to make the setting available for as many different systems as possible. Because I could certainly see someone doing that. I mean, I've seen Green Ronin themselves have done that with their Freeport setting. Is in several. There's several different rules versions of that, and they've done that also with their Blue Rose setting. There's like 3 different versions of that. So is that something you were at all trying to do, or it just kind of happened?
It just kind of happened. I have to thank an old friend of mine that I met like in 2nd grade. We've known ever since there, a guy named John Phillips, and I was talking some giant monster ideas, trying to come up with sort of a new origin for kaiju, where they come from, something that would be consistent with sort of as close to real world physics as you could get. And of course, then I got into like Asian mysticism because I've always been fascinated by Asian religions. And I'm trying to think, where do these things come from? And I was thinking, oh, maybe they're genetically engineered or something like that. Maybe they were weapons. And my friend John Phillips just said, what about kaiju on the DMZ? And that idea struck me like a lightning bolt. The idea of like North Korea creating giant monsters was just, it was absurd and yet somehow perfect. And like early 2000s, so like North Korea was becoming a lot more belligerent at that time. And so that combined with like sort of my my interest in Shinto, the indigenous religion of Japan, love of World War II, all of this sort of evolved into, at the end of World War II, Japan is losing. They become desperate, and a corrupt Shinto priest attempts to summon a demon to fight for Japan. And they do it in Hiroshima on the day that the atomic bomb was dropped. So as this demon is coming through the gate, it is struck by an atom bomb and mutated and driven insane. And the Japanese beg the Americans to call off the monster they just dropped on Japan, and the Americans are like, huh? So they actually work together the next 3 days, drive the monster west to the city of Nagasaki, where it is killed with a second atomic bomb. That is the first kaiju in the world. Genetic material is stolen, taken to North Korea, where it is grown into the first earthbound kaiju called Kaibutsu. It's my ode to Godzilla, and it's first used in the Korean War. After that, the world spins as if every giant monster movie ever made actually happened. So Kaibutsu attacks in 1953. They start making mutated insects, moths, so giant moths start flying around.
Yeah.
Looking at all this, I'm thinking, okay, this is cool. I can tie in all of these movies into this setting and have like analogs for all of the monsters show up. I'm also I'm an English and history teacher, so I love sort of alternate history stuff. And so I tried to tie everything. A lot of my source books have timelines that actually mirror events in the real world. And I was like, okay, so how does the US and the Soviet Union not end up like, just like dominating these giant monsters and destroying everything? So the communist countries I kind of took care of, quote unquote, because they're blamed for the creation of the kaiju. So like their credibility politically is shot. Nobody trusts communist countries because they blame them for creating these monsters. And the U.S., I don't know if you've covered a whole lot of the giant bug movies from the 1950s?
Yes, we began with King Kong and we worked our way chronologically through what we perceive as the history of kaiju movies.
So you covered them, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes. We've done
And yes,
all
yes,
we've done
yeah,
all of
them,
those.
giant mantis, all.
Yep.
So like I say, in this world, all of that stuff happened. So like I'm looking at all
Uh-huh.
like this rash of giant bug movies in the 1950s and think, well, if all of those happened at the same time, America is in big trouble. And so I
Mhm.
imagine what would happen in the 1950s if this occurred. And so what ends up happening is the entire southwestern portion of the U.S. is just evacuated because it is overrun with giant bugs.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think like okay, so, like they go south, they get to Texas. Well, Texas is not going to give in. So the Texas Rangers basically hold them off. The Mexican military moves actually north and helps them hold the line. They stop the giant bugs at the Mississippi River, and they stop them at the Sierra Nevada mountains. And and the bugs don't want to go any further north than like some of the they stop at the more northerly states. So basically that if you can imagine that box, imagine a map of the U.S. and that box is now the continental control region, and it was just evacuated, with the exception of the Mormons, who refused to leave, and they basically turned
Okay.
Salt Lake City into a fortress, and Native American. And politically, what happens is the Native Americans go, "Okay, you're moving out of here. We'll take it. We'll
Yeah.
help you fight. We'll help you fight
Thank God.
yeah, we'll help you fight the bugs on the inside, but this is now ours." And
Yeah.
the U.S. agrees, and so that becomes the First Nation.
All
So
right.
so that box is essentially it is a sovereign country bordered by the U.S. One thing I've always wanted to do is set up like a sandbox campaign set in that
Mhm.
area where like you're either you're a member of the Continental Rangers, like that's guarding the border, or you're a Native American, or you're a Mormon, and like sort of like a real sort of like military sci-fi campaign, almost post-apocalyptic, because it's like a lot of areas have been abandoned, and there's a lot of desert areas around there. So it could have a real post-apocalyptic vibe. It could have this like cool military action, stuff like that. There's a lot of fun stuff that you could do with that. But that was how I created a world where there are no superpowers. Everybody is kind of working together to defend their countries
Oh,
from the
sorry, you
Kaiju.
mean political superpowers, not
Exactly right. Yeah. So yeah, there are no
not
political
Superman
superpowers.
superpowers.
Right. Yeah. So Soviet Union still exists, but they're rather insular. America is like they've got this situation that they're dealing with, so they're happy to help kind of locally, but like North and South America form kind of their own block. United Nations is more a kind of like joint defense organization. The borders of all of these nations, people contribute to, like internal countries contribute to the external countries. Students have a ocean border to create like defenses and things. And yeah, the world kind of spun in a very different way, but I like to think a believable way. If all of these things were true, this is one way that it could have all shaken out.
So this is laid out in what, the Fate of America book?
Yeah, Fate of America details what happened in the U.S. Even Leo looks at like some of the political progression. How did it affect some of the elections and things like that. Fate of the World covers basically everything that is not Asia or the United States, and that's where I really had a lot of fun looking at Africa, looking at what would happen if colonialism ended early in the 1950s, and how things would have shaken out there. If everybody left Africa alone, what would happen? And I think it would they would redraw borders based on language groups. Mediterranean states would have stayed the same because those are very strong political and trade powers. But everything like, in Saharan and sub-Saharan Africa, basically I looked at a language map of Africa and I created the borders based on that. So Swahili is kind of the universal language of Africa, but
Uh-huh.
each language group kind of just like carved out their own political identity. And it also follows natural borders rather than like, Belgium needs like so many thousands of acres of land, and so we're just going to like cut a box out of this section here, and like never mind what's there or who's there. So yeah, like it follows natural borders, language borders, and I'd like to think that left to their own devices, Africa would have done quite well.
Now, when the new version of the game comes out, are you going to have to re-release all this with the new rules, or are these source books, are the rules in them light enough that it won't make much difference?
Well, I think the setting stuff will. You can certainly use all the setting stuff, and I'll be and I'll certainly be adapting a lot of it to the new system. The history itself is basically going to be the same, kind of like moved forward like 20 years basically. So because I started this in like
Okay.
early 2000s, but essentially
Right.
things will happen. The setting will basically be the same, just because that is that's the one that I think is most accessible to gamers.
Mhm.
It's the one that has the least amount of preconceived notions. I'll give you an example. I did a source book called Kaiju Punk, which is a cyberpunk setting within the MVK world, and it takes place in a world where something happened in the 1990s or the early 2000s, and it changed a lot of things. I got a lot of inspiration there from Shadowrun,
Yeah.
which makes fantasy and cyberpunk, elves and dwarves and things like that. So working within the existing history of MVK, I had like sort of a cyberpunk setting that was like, what happens if the end of a campaign didn't go quite right, and then like a lot of things changed after that? It's kind of that idea. I've got there's a post-apocalyptic setting that I never got a chance to do. I'll do it eventually, but it's like, what if the kaiju win? How do you live in a world where like society basically breaks down, and the kaiju are just able to roam freely across the world. So all of these, from the kind of internal logic of the game, all of it fits together because of the man who invented the giant robots, a guy named Professor Rampo Chiari. He's the classic elderly mad scientist type character that you've seen in like so many, especially like 60s and 70s Showa era. Like the guy who created Titanosaurus. Like that's really sort of my my template for this guy. But he actually had a vision, and during Kaibutsu's first attack in Japan, and you might notice the source material I'm getting this from. His mother was praying and holding him while watching this monster destroy the city, saying, "Don't worry, we're going to be with your father soon." And this
Okay.
child, right? So
Yeah. Yep.
this child suddenly has this vision, and he, from a scientific point of view, I'm saying he connected to the unified field theory in a very sort of intuitive way, and for just a moment, he saw sort of the shape of the universe. And he has spent his entire life teasing out little scientific secrets from that one vision that he had as a child. And so when he was a teenager, he created the first remote-controlled giant robot that, like, he could control with his voice. So getting into like, Tetsujin and Giant Robot. And then in the 70s, he's able to kind of break the code on, it's called Gazer technology, and it's an acronym related to using gravity as a power source. So he creates a super robot, one giant super robot called Kagutsuchi, named after the Shinto god of fire. And that's my ode to the Shogun warriors, Raideen and Mazinger and the like. And then for some reason in the 80s, in the late 70s, early 80s, the kaiju disappear, and people think, oh, okay, maybe they're gone, maybe they've died out, maybe we won't have to worry anymore. And then 1984 hits, and it's like kaiju summer. They just explode, and like the people are freaking out. Professor Chiari creates sort of a mass producible robot, smaller but can be created in numbers, and that's where sort of the military sci-fi mecha teams come into play, and that's kind of the genre that I go that I stick with for kind of the rest of the campaign history, and I think is the most accessible to players, because everybody wants a robot. Everybody wants to customize their robot. They want to fight the way they want to fight. And so, like, just like you have, like, barbarians and rogues and rangers in a fantasy game, you can have, like, the tough, brutish mecha who, like, gets in close with the kaiju. Another one who's, like, sniping them with a rifle. Another one's trying to, like, trip them up or somehow, like, sort of, like, reduce their ability to fight. And the system is set up so that you can fully customize your mecha however you want, and that was really an important mechanical part of the game for me.
Okay, yeah, we should mention the game basically presumes that you will be part of the Mecha Assault Force and fighting against kaiju.
Mm-hmm.
We've been looking at a couple of different games, and some of them you're fighting the kaiju, some of them you are the kaiju, and others you can be either one.
Yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't do that as well, because the rules for creating kaiju, the similar point to building robots. The trick is that the kaiju have to be the kind of threat that requires multiple people to attack in order to attack it. So yeah, they're designed to be scary.
This new system you're working on, is that going to be your end game, or have you considered doing versions for like Savage Worlds or Age?
For as far as
you started with Green Ronin,
right? Sure.
I should say Age is the one of the Green Ronin system, and they have a Age Creators Alliance, and they allow you to do a degree of your own stuff to release with their system.
Right. I'm 53, so this is probably the last system that I'm going to create. I don't know, maybe for my 60th birthday I'll decide I want something new. But there are no plans for a new system, which is why we're really taking our time and crafting this one, making it everything that we want. Always in previous systems, it's kind of been adapting the game to the system, and this time we started with, like I say, with this kind of fundamental idea of I wanted to model anime and manga action and drama, and so that was why we really took our time creating the stats to make sure that the decisions that characters were making when they're taking actions are designed to make them think like a character in an anime series or a character in a manga. And to kind of have everything motivated by what's inside their character. So, if you're gonna punch somebody, in a lot of games that would be like, okay, well, you're gonna use your strength for that. And in this game, it's like, well, you could use your strength, sure, but why are you doing it? Like, what kind of part of your personality is kind of motivating you to do that? Or is it like a dramatic situation where, like, the situation you're in is related to something that is important to you personally? Well, that should have something to do with how good or bad you are at doing it, because that's the way it is in an anime. If you care about the situation, you're going to be better at it than than you might be otherwise.
Hmm.
So yeah, so everything is designed for the player to think from the point of view of what's important to my character at this moment, and those are role playing choices that you make as you are assembling your dice pool. So that's why I call it calling out your traits. So you're basically say, okay, I'm going to do, I'm going to use my sarcastic to a fault personality aspect. And because even though I'm trying to fight this guy, I'm wisecracking while I'm doing it. I'm attacking in a creative way. So I'm like trying to throw him off, and I'm trying to help my friends while I'm doing this. So kinship is important. Is important to me as I'm doing this. And so each one of those is a die that you add to
Okay.
your dice pool, and then you roll those with the fortune die, d20, and then you just add two of them together to get your action result. And then one of the dice that's left over is going to be your impact on that scene. And so sometimes you end up making, really want to have, a higher impact. So maybe I'll take a lower result, or maybe it's just like, well, if I don't connect, it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to take the highest, add the two highest dice together for my result and take whatever impact I can get.
This is reminding me a little of, the Robert Downey Jr. version of Sherlock Holmes
Mm-hmm.
when he has that bare knuckle fight in the beginning.
Yeah, he's attacking with intelligence.
Yes, he's not punching with his strength; he's punching with his intellect. Or the example you just gave of using a smartass, maybe you tweak the guy's nose and snap his suspenders before you stomp on his foot, and you're not really necessarily using your strength or your agility to make that attack. You're using your smartass quality to make that attack.
And yeah, and
That's a very interesting approach.
yeah, and it allows the players to decide what's important to them at that particular time. My goal has really been to avoid the, my turn, I roll, I hit, I do this damage, moving on. And
Sure.
so there's like, there are conditions that you can add to a scene that will make it, easier or harder to do certain things. You can add a condition to to an enemy to make it easier to affect them. The idea you can create boons for your friends that will make things easier for them to perform particular actions, and all of these options are there in game to not just make it easier for you to beat the bad guy, but to do it in a way that is fun and that adds to the story.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. I like that. That's good. Well, Jonathan, we've been going on for a while now, so I think this is a good place to wrap it up. But we will put the link to all the things, to the drive-through and to the Patreon. When this new version's done, what is the format it's going to come out in? Is it going to be like a player's book and a game master's book, or just one big core book, or what do you have in mind?
To release it as like a single core book, hardcover, color. There'll be a crowdsource campaign in the summertime, hopefully in June.
Okay.
And
Right.
I've already got our interior artist working on artwork. So the money for the money for the Patreon is all going to the book and the game. So like everything I'm taking in is going out in the form of art and writing, layout, things like that. So yeah, it will hopefully in June we'll launch that campaign, and depending on how successful it is, the basic idea is to have like a single core book, but of course there will be stretch goals for like additional supplements, because as you mentioned, I have a lot of areas that I can go into for additional source books.
Maybe we'll have you back on to talk about that when it launches.
I'd be happy to.
I've certainly kickstarted way too many games.
Haven't we all?
I'll definitely be taking a look at that when it's out. Find the links for all the things in the show notes. And Johnathan Wright, thank you very much for joining us here today. Folks, if you enjoy our show, please consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/mmftg. Until next time, I have been your host, Precious D. Remember to keep calm and seek shelter in basements. Don't misuse science. I won't see you, but you will hear me next time on Monster Movie Fun Time Go. You've been listening to Monster Movie Fun Time Go. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on your podcasting platform of choice. Our theme song is by the Texacato Folk Rock Punk featuring Lita Lopez. You can support the show, find links to our social media, and even leave us a voice message at anchor.fm/mmftg.